The Battle of Berlin was the final major battle in the European theater of World War II. The final days of the Soviet Red Army's push to take the Reichstag included some of the most violent urban combat of the war. Even today, 80 years later, you can still see traces of this fighting on government buildings, on monuments, on infrastructure, even in cemeteries. And in this video, I'm going to take you to some of these locations, including Potsdamer Platz, the Victory Column, Brandenburg Gate, the Reichstag, and a few places further afield. Especially for the first-time visitor to Berlin, these are locations that you're likely to go visit anyway. This is part 2 of a 2-part series. Part 1, where I take you to Mitte, will be linked in the description and comment sections below, but you don't need to watch that video first. I also created a map of these locations so that you can follow along when you are in Berlin. Or you could hire me to take you around. Hi, I'm Steve from Experienced Berlin Tours. Let's get started.
But first, a little bit of background. And if you watched part 1 already, then just skip ahead to the next section. The Battle for Berlin was the final major engagement in the European theater of World War II. By mid-April of 1945, a force of over 2 million Soviet soldiers was at the city's doorstep. Berlin, especially its central areas, had been left in ruins from bombing raids by American and British air forces, and now artillery shelling from the Soviets. Outmanned and outgunned at least 3-1, the Germans chose to focus the city's most capable defenders inside of 2 central perimeters. The first was the city's S-Bahn ring, just a 40-kilometer perimeter. Inside of that was the second perimeter, the Citadel, which was the central area between the River Spree and the Landwehr Canal. The Citadel included the government sector, including the Reichstag and the Reichschancellery, where Hitler was hiding in a bunker. And thanks to the folks at Traces of War for this illustrative image. The most intense urban fighting happened in these 2 areas, and this is where most of the battle damage can still be seen today. We start off at Humboldthain Park. The park is located adjacent to Gesundbrunnen Station, the northern crossing of the city's S-Bahn ring line. There's a decent chance that you'll be passing through here during your stay. And for many visitors, the reason for exiting here is the Berliner Unterwelden, or in English, the Berlin Underworld Organization. Their museum and ticket office are here, and some of their popular tours begin from here too. And one of those tours visits the inside of what concerns us for this video. Inside of Humboldthain Park are the partial remains of an elevated bunker and Flaktower. 3 of these towers were constructed in Berlin during the war to ward off Allied bombing raids on the city. The fortress also served as an air raid shelter for tens of thousands of residents. The tower was immense and designed to withstand the worst of Allied bombing raids. And with reinforced concrete walls 3.5 meters thick, the tower was built to absorb an assault from the ground as well. The Red Army considered it too costly to assault directly. It was bypassed and isolated as Soviet troops moved deeper into the inner city, having breached the first of the 2 inner defensive rings. And despite the lack of a direct assault, the tower still had to withstand mortar, tank, and small arms fires, in addition to aerial bombardment. You can still see the scars of these attacks on the northern wall of the tower, as well as the eastern wall, or what remains visible of it today. Interestingly, these indentations have proven fortuitous for wall climbers, and a local climbing club regularly scale these walls. I will link to a video that I made about the Flaktower in the description below. And adjacent to the park, on its south side, was one of Berlin's largest industrial sites, home to the electrical giant AEG. It was a major target for the Red Army because it was a critical site for wartime production, in particular electrical components for radios, radar, and other communications equipment. Additionally, it was one of the many locations where forced laborers, in this case Poles, were compelled to work, and this plaque is in remembrance of these victims of National Socialism. It was heavily fortified and also part of Berlin's larger defensive network. The fighting here was fierce, and the Red Army had to fight building by building and floor by floor. Evidence of the fighting is scattered throughout the complex. Some is quite obvious, while others appear to be patched up sections. Its survival was undoubtedly aided by the presence of the Flaktower guns nearby. Today, the campus is a mixed-use innovations park shared by universities and businesses. And now on to our next location, the Berlin district of Charlottenburg. I mentioned this next stop in part 1 when I discussed the Stadtbahn line viaduct. The Stadtbahn line was the city's first public rail line and was built in the late 19th century. The tracks sit on an 8-kilometer-long viaduct made mostly of brick, stone, and iron. The viaduct's arches, bridges, and elevated tracks were used as cover in firing positions by German forces and targets for Soviet forces. Underneath one of its train trestles, on Leibnitzstrasse in Charlottenburg, is a hole from a shell that pierced through one of the steel beams. It collided with the next beam and then ricocheted off into the wall. And here you can see what appears to be damage to the brickwork that exists till this day. And according to Peter, the founder of Berlin Battle Tours, it likely was an 85mm armor-piercing shell from a Soviet tank fired at Germans trying to break out of the city in the final days of the Battle of Berlin. And a special thanks to Peter, whose research influenced some of the locations included in this series. Peter runs guided walking tours in Berlin that focus on World War II and the Battle of Berlin, so be sure to check out his page and tours. Now on to our next location. And we are still in the Berlin district of Charlottenburg, at Reichstag Platz, just 2 S-Bahn stops away from our last stop. And this is perhaps Berlin's most iconic World War II memorial. The Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church is a late 19th century neo-Romanesque church built on the orders of Kaiser Wilhelm II to honor his grandfather, Kaiser Wilhelm I. It was heavily damaged in a 1943 Allied bombing raid. And rather than demolish the ruins, the shattered spire was preserved to serve as a reminder of the true costs of war. And due to its position at the intersection of large access roads just south of the Landwehr Canal, it unfortunately found itself in the middle of fierce urban fighting as the Red Army pushed on into the Tiergarten. And the ruins are still covered in bullet and mortar marks. You can visit inside the entrance hall where you'll find a beautiful mosaic, and daily tours are offered, including one that takes you on a climb high up inside the spire. The central nave was demolished after the war. Today you will find the new church, where the inside is bathed in sunlight through blue stained glass. And now on to our next location. Potsdamer Platz is arguably Berlin's busiest intersection, and you will certainly stop here at least once, especially on a first visit to the city. Nothing but the street layout today resembles the Potsdamer Platz of pre-war Berlin. Just about every trace of the Battle of Berlin has been removed from the site. But if you head to the entrance to the lobby of the Deutsche Bahn building, one of the modern glass curtain towers dominating the square, you will find one of the salvaged Potsdamer Platz S-Bahn signs behind glass. The sign, with its bullet holes, placed right at the heart of this transformed area, creates quite a juxtaposition. And long gone is the Potsdamer Bahnhof, Berlin's first train station, whose terminal building stood on the very southern side of Potsdamer Platz. The building, as well as the rail lines, were heavily damaged, and the main terminus last saw a train in 1943. Today, on the land once occupied by the station and its lines, is a series of parks that stretches 2 kilometers southward. While these green spaces are certainly no scars, they are visual reminders of the consequences of the conflict. And speaking of train stations, there is another one of note, just a 10-minute walk or one S-Bahn stop south of Potsdamer Platz. These are the remains of the Anhalter Bahnhof station. Like Potsdamer Bahnhof, this station was heavily damaged in the Second World War, but this would stay in place for a short period after the conflict. Only the facade survives today, another memorial for the war. And you can see the bullet and mortar marks all over it, again evidence of the street battles that raged around it. And as is the case with Potsdamer Bahnhof, the tracks leading up to the station have been replaced with green spaces, and one of Berlin's concert venues, the Tempodrom. Okay, moving on. And once again, we don't have to go far before we reach our next location. The Martin Gropius Bau is a museum and exhibition space. Its neighbor, the Topography of Terror, sits on the site of the SS and Gestapo headquarters during the Nazi era. Today, the site is a documentation center that records and reports on the horrors and war crimes of the SS. It's a must-visit for every first-time visitor to Berlin. Understandably, this was a particularly important target for the Red Army. The museum, hollowed out as a result of bombing raids, served as cover for the striking forces. The bullet and mortar marks on the museum are the result of the fierce resistance from the defenders inside of the SS headquarters. Even more striking today is the damage on the statues at the entrance to the museum, with this one having lost its head, legs, and hands. And another building that was in the path of the Red Army at this later stage is our next stop, as we make our way to the Reichstag. And this next spot, just a 10-minute walk from Potsdamer Platz, is what I would call a survivor. The Villa Parey, once a part of a development of similar mansions, today seems out of place among the museums and hotels around it. Amazingly, it survived the war with relatively little damage, considering bombing raids leveled its erstwhile neighbors. It was in the path of the Red Army units in the final days of the Battle of Berlin. It's known as the Wunden der Erinnerungen, or Wounds of Memory, and its bullet and mortar markings were deliberately left here during a post-war renovation as yet another reminder. Today it houses some rooms of the Gemäldegalerie, which probably explains the whiteout curtains in front of the windows. And now we head into the Tiergarten to visit one of Berlin's most iconic symbols. The Siegersäule, or Victory Column, is a monument that was erected in 1873 to celebrate the Kingdom of Prussia's victories over Denmark, Austria, and France, in 3 conflicts known as the Wars of German Unification. The monument was moved to the central axis of the Tiergarten just before the war, and this put it on a strategic intersection during the final days of the Battle of Berlin. And the damage is apparent right at the base. The marble cladding shows the now familiar pop marks from bullet and mortar fire. And the 4 bronze reliefs covering each of the 4 sides are riddled with bullet holes. Some figures are missing heads or hands. Even the clergy, as well as Jesus, weren't spared. And the marble columns at the first lookout point clearly show signs of combat. And throughout this level, you will see battle scars of all kinds. I suspect there was significantly more damage as a result of the war, with some of it being repaired. And the same goes for another of Berlin's icons, the Brandenburg Gate, which is located just a short walk from the Siegersäule. The Brandenburg Gate is the only remaining gate from the Berlin's custom wall. But unlike the last location, the Brandenburg Gate was pummeled during the war. There were 2 phases of restoration, and I would imagine that roughly 50% of the structure was recycled. You can clearly see from this angle that some of the columns are distinct from the others, and most display the obvious signs of repairs made to chips in the stone. And in some columns, new sections of stone were mixed with repaired sections. And I have a video on the Brandenburg Gate, and I will leave a link to it in the description below. Now on to our next location, which is just a 5-minute walk from here. The Reichstag Building was built in the late 19th century to house the German parliament, what's today known as the Bundestag. The building had been abandoned during the reign of the Nazis, but it nevertheless held symbolic importance for the Soviets. It suffered severe damage from Allied bombing raids, but it was the siege of the Reichstag that caused the most damage. German forces used the building for logical defensive positions. The Soviets unleashed howitzers, rocket artillery, tank fire, as well as small arms fire in an attempt to pulverize the building and eliminate its defenders. The markings from the battle are not as obvious here as they are at other locations, and it's my guess that's because the building, once again, was to house Germany's parliament. But you can still see them if you look very closely. Most of the damage can be seen on this side, the eastern front, as the Red Army approached. And if you take a tour of the Reichstag, you will likely be taken to parts of the building where graffiti left by Red Army soldiers after the building's capture can still be seen today.
And it is believed that up to 2,000 Red Army soldiers died during the siege. And just a stone throws away is the Soviet War Memorial in Tiergarten, where, as I understand it, most of those 2,000 fallen soldiers are buried. I made a video of this memorial, which I will link to in the description below. And don't forget that the scope of this video, these 2 videos, was to go to locations that visitors to Berlin are likely to go. But the scars of World War II and the Battle of Berlin are not limited to these central areas. You can find these markings throughout the city, in much of the city, in graveyards, on infrastructure, on residential and commercial buildings. Let me know in the comments section below if you'd like me to do a video of these more off the beaten path locations. And if you haven't already done so, you can check out part 1 right here, or you can check out this playlist where I visit other World War II and Third Reich locations here in Berlin. And if you like this video, please give it a like and share it with somebody you think who also might like this video. And I'll see you in the next video. Tschüss!